All right, now we're good to go. Good evening, friends, and welcome. I'm Bill Harmer, the Executive Director of the Westport Library. Thank you all for coming out this evening to honor and welcome back to Westport, Charles Joyner.
Thank you.
With the opening of our new exhibit, Charles Joyner Stepping Out on Faith. Having spent the last couple of days getting to know Mr. Joyner and his wife Lorenzo a bit better, it's such a privilege for me to be able to welcome him to the stage tonight along with our panelists as well. The genesis of this project dates back to May of 2020 when Charles' lifelong friend Roger Kaufman reached out to me about inviting Charles to participate in our Artist in Resident video series. You may recall, or maybe you want to forget, that during that time we were at the height of the pandemic and the lockdown. As a result of the shuttered art galleries, our exhibit curator, Carol Erger-Fass, enlisted ace reporter Miggs Burrows to visit local artists in their homes, virtually on Zoom, eventually amassing over 40 artist interviews documenting the state of the arts during the pandemic and beyond. And of course, Miggs and Carol jumped at the chance to reconnect with Charles again. In his interview, Charles shared his story of his remarkable journey, his influences, and his vibrant multi-layered artwork. So Roger's phone call essentially created a domino effect that led to a video and an interview that led to a grant proposal and generous funding from the Connecticut Arts Council, Humanities Council, and the Drew Friedman Community Arts Center, which led to tonight's celebration of this extraordinary artist, the exhibit, a podcast series, a drum performance, and tonight's panel discussion. Right. Although Charles currently lives in North Carolina, his connection to our community is quite deep. Having come to Westport in 1964 at the age of 16 as part of a program that brought black students from the segregated schools in the Jim Crow South to the North, where they lived with host families and attended high school. So Charles stepped out of his home in rural North Carolina and moved to Westport to attend Staples High School, where he made lifelong friends, became a star halfback on the football team and basketball player before graduating in 1966. Football took Charles to college at Iowa State, but unlike his experience here in Westport, he found a campus stricken with racial tension. After a year, he returned to North Carolina, transferred to North Carolina A&T, and changed course to study art and design. After graduating, he went on to get his MFA at the University of North Carolina. During this time, he also connected with his Southern African American roots. Charles became a beloved and distinguished professor of design at North Carolina Central University and then later at North Carolina State University, where he also served as the director of the Ghana Study Abroad program. Making over 35 trips, he and his students gained unparalleled access to Ghana's traditional craft villages and artisans. If you know his work, and if you've seen the exhibit in our Sheffer Gallery, then you can see the profound influence that these journeys abroad had on his art. His beautiful collages pay tribute to the ancestry, the rituals, religion, and spirituality permeating Ghanaian communities and convey his own cross-cultural connections. The same program that brought Charles to Westport also brought 14 other Southern black students to Connecticut, including Bonnyeclaire Smith Stewart, who left her home in Birmingham, Alabama to attend school in Norwalk around the same time as Charles. Bonnyeclaire is the founder and executive director of 4 Million Voices, a nonprofit research organization that focuses on documenting the lives of African Americans. She is also the creator and producer of Beyond the Mason, a forthcoming documentary on the programs across the country that brought Southern Black students from segregated schools in the South to the North from the 1950s through the 1970s. Bonnyeclaire is the host of Stepping Out on Faith, the podcast, developed in conjunction with our own Verso Studios at the Westport Library, which features rich conversations with people connected to Charles' art and life from Westport to North Carolina to Ghana and beyond. So please visit our website and take a listen to these fascinating podcast discussions when you get a chance. Our moderator tonight is our good friend, Mr. Trey Ellis. Trey, as you know, lives here in Westport. He is an American Book Award-winning novelist, Emmy and Peabody Award-winning documentary filmmaker, playwright, and professor of screenwriting in the Graduate School of Film at Columbia University. Most recently, he was the executive producer, interviewer, and co-field director of the HBO documentary True Justice, Brian Stevenson's Fight for Equality, and executive producer and interviewer for King in the Wilderness, which chronicles the final chapters of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, also available on HBO. Let me close by thanking Charles for allowing us to share his personal journey and his art with our community, including a private meeting he held with a group of students earlier today at the library, students from the ABC program. I also want to thank Bonnyeclaire, whose knowledge and assistance proved invaluable throughout the duration of this whole project. And finally, thanks go to our co-curating team of Kathy Benowitz and Carol Erger-Fass for presenting this spectacular exhibit, and to Jennifer Bangser, who alongside Kathy and Carol recognized the importance of this project from the beginning and nurtured it along its journey. So Trey, let me hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you all for coming, and I want to thank the library again, and Bill and Alex and Jennifer and all the staff here. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be here in general, like not having to wear a mask again, and having a small child here. I'm here all the time, so to have grown-up time in the library is Before we get really started again, I want to throw it to Bonnyeclaire. You have something you wanted to. Do you had a letter that you wanted to
Certainly.
Share with us?
A little introduction. When Charles came to Westport, the host family that wanted him, that chose him from a listing of students, was the family of Saul and Lita Ader and their two children, Wendy and Peter. Mm-hmm. Saul is no longer with us. Lita in her 90s lives in Arizona, and Wendy is in Canada, and Peter is in Santa Fe. But they are here in spirit. Peter sent the arrangement of flowers to be present, and they sent this letter to you, Charles.
Okay.
I'd like to read it to you now.
Sure.
Charles, on behalf of the Ader family, we wish to express how proud we are of our brother. Charles, for all of your outstanding accomplishments, vision, and recognition. We both wanted to be with you, and all of you gathered in Westport tonight, but traveling from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Prince Edward Island, Canada, where we each live, was just not possible right now. Back in 1964, our parents, Lita and Saul, heard about the American Friends Service Committee's program, and they immediately knew they wanted to participate. And out of all the students on that list, with luck and surely a dose of alchemy, we connected with Charles Joyner. And just like that, through love, intention, and connection, our family of 4 became a family of 5. We went to every basketball game, every football game to watch Charles play.
Every one of them.
Although Charles had a love for art even back then, sports became his main focus at Staples, and he rose to the top to be captain of star of the team. At age 96, and an artist in her own right, living in a small town in Arizona, Our mom, Lita, remains incredibly proud of you, Charles, and also becoming an artist like she. And up until Saul's death in 2005, our dad always talked about Charlie and held him in his heart as a part of our family. So many of our best memories growing up in Westford include you, Charles. We are all the better for knowing you and proud to call you our brother, Peter and Wendy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So that leads me to my first question. Could you talk about what it felt like if, as a 16-year-old, how did you get up here? Did you take the bus? How did you land? What were those first days like here in Westport?
Sure. I think that you can already see from the letter, you know, what the environment was going to be like when I got here. I mean, that's proof of the pudding. And my father and my brother drove us up here from Smithfield, North Carolina. And as a matter of fact, for those of you who have been in the gallery, there's a large black and white photograph of my dad, Saul, Wendy, Peter, my brother, and I'm in that same photograph. My dad was visually impaired since he was 14 years old. So he says to my mom, let him go, because it would be an opportunity that certainly the two of us never had. And we know that they'll know about us through him. And so, you know, it was, and then Westford, a welcoming community. Now, I do realize that the fact that I was a star athlete kind of gave me an edge. Now, don't be wrong now. I realize that. It gave me a little bit of an edge. So, but still, Paul Lane was an incredible coach. He was a player's coach. And we lost a lot of football games in my senior year. As a matter of fact, Ann reminded me of that today when I had lunch with her. She says, I was in the band, and we just started hating going to the games because y'all were losing. I said, Ann, settle down, please. But, you know, it was that kind of community. I made friends quickly. Now, a lot of people knew me because of the athletics, but early on I didn't know a lot of people. The Aiders, in fact, had very good friends and a support group that stepped in and made sure that, you know, they didn't have to carry the entire burden by themselves.
And were there other black students already here at the school?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there were two guys who were Calvin and Charlie Reynolds. They were my good friends. There were, I think, 3 other African-American students at Staples at that time. They may have all been seniors in our class and so forth. So yes, there was a community of students. And then, of course, I would venture out and go to Norwalk, you know. I found a barber over there, by the way, who would cut my hair. Yeah. So I went to Norwalk to get my hair cut. And, of course, knew through Charlie and Calvin, knew LaSalle Reynolds, who played with Calvin Murphy on the same basketball team. Yeah.
If I may, Charles, could you, in keeping with the theme of stepping out on faith, could you share a little bit about how you heard about the program at school?
Oh, yeah. So there was an assembly, and the assistant principal came up to the podium and said, you know, I have this application for a very wonderful program the American Friends Service Committee is sponsoring, and they're going to help to support a student from Smithfield to perhaps go to a school in a northern city. It's a one-way exchange, but we think it would be beneficial and some, you know, a real, you know, opportunity to enjoy a different experience. And so if you're interested in the program, come to my office. And I showed up, knocked on the door, and I'm thinking now there's probably about 20, 30 guys have been through here looking for the program.
Right.
These are great. So you're my first applicant and only. So I don't think anybody else was really excited about doing that. But I have to tell you about leaving that community. When I was accepted, I knew the challenges that were ahead of me, even though I was 16 years old. And I knew that not only did I need to succeed for myself and my parents, my family, but also for that community. Because it was a community that raised me. I mean, you come home, you do something out in the community bad, and your mom and dad knew about it when you got home.
Right.
I mean, it was just that kind of outreach. And so Miss Lily Mae, who lived down there on the corner, she gonna tell somebody about what you did. I mean, it was, it was just, that kind of community. But was going to also make sure that they gave you good advice, So that, was the kind of, when I left home, I really had that feeling that I was going to be responsible for a lot of different things outside of myself. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you two met then. You met during that time.
Yes, we did. And
we
actually,
did.
Yeah, we actually went on a speaking engagement together that Saul Ader had arranged.
He had arranged.
And there were quite a number of opportunities when I was asked to speak.
And so they're speaking arrangements in front of white, well-meaning people to hear what it's like to live in Birmingham or what your experience was like?
Well, some of the groups were all white. Reverend Jordan, who was the pastor of First Church on the Green, at that time, I didn't realize it, but one of the groups that he had me to meet with, I sensed were decision makers. They were important people. And at that time, I didn't realize that he was trying to urge the congregation to be more diverse. Some of the audiences were only African Americans, Jack and Jill, which is a group that was started to give opportunities to children of families and families an opportunity to create opportunities, because outside of the family and the community, there were none. And so it's varied. Some student groups, radio shows.
But you're teenagers. You're 15,
Yeah,
16
we
years old.
were teenagers at the time, right.
And did you feel the pressure? Did you feel pressure up here to? I mean, in Westport, as a so far going on 4 kids going to the Staples High School of drinking, crazy partying. Did you feel that you couldn't do any of that stuff because you had Smithfield back there, to look up to?
Trey, what's wrong with you? Trey, what?
I just know for my kids, just
Don't look
after
over
they
here,
graduate, they
Charles.
tell me all the things that they've done that which scandalized me.
And it's probably true.
But did you feel that pressure here to could you be yourself? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think so. I was a member of a club over here at the YMCA, by the way, which used to be on that corner, the Community Service Club. But I can't remember any services that we went to. Jeff, you remember any services that we did? Yeah, there you go. No, I think that, we were, I ran around with a group of jocks. There was that in itself was a special kind of, I wouldn't say culture, more like a cult than anything else. But they were good kids. I mean, they were good kids. Stayed out of trouble and most of the time and so forth. Because I don't think you could play for Paul Lane if you got yourself in serious trouble. You just were not going to be on his team. Right. So forth. So,
when we talk about, I'm glad, it's wonderful that you had such a positive experience. But it's also true that as the principal down in North Carolina mentioned, it's a one-way exchange, which
Yeah.
is unusual to these days compared to the people we have now from,
Right.
say, a Korean student, or we send people back and forth. You know, and we talked backstage a little bit about, in the news, the Native Americans, children that are taken from their families, right, to be raised in boarding schools, to be kind of legitimized. Philip Roth has that, you know, wonderful scenes in The Plot Against America, where Jewish kids are sent to the South to sort of be, quote unquote, normalized. Was there any sense at all of, like, you know, you're in the early 60s, right? So civil rights movement's percolating. Did you feel that kind of, I don't know, either tokenism or pressure or anything to speak about that? When things happen, do they always look to you? I mean, for me, even as a kid growing up a little bit later, if something happens in the news and you're the person that has to answer that question.
Well, you know, I think the aiders were well aware and were very open to an exchange of, you know, cultures in our house. That was the thing. And he and I shared a love for music. As a matter of fact, when he found out that I was a drummer, we went down to New York and he bought a set of drums so that he and I could play together. You know, it was, you know, just, and then there were other, some of my buddies who, I remember one guy who plays piano, Roger, you probably remember. But anyway, came to the Aiders' home and we would have little jam sessions and so forth, you know. And Saul was a real fan of Benny Goodman and all of the, you know, and the people who played New Orleans jazz. So their household, when we talked about politics and dealt with issues like, you know, the things that were going on in the 60s, you know, it was a shared commitment. I mean, a shared feeling about what was going on. Right. And we were kind of, you know, really on the same page. Yeah. So let me tell you, I lucked out. I mean, there's no doubt about it, you know. And I talked to Bonnyeclaire about some of the research that she's done on the program, finding that some of the other students who were in other situations didn't do as well, and some went home. Am I correct? Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit, Bonnyeclaire?
Yes, the experiences from the students I've been able to contact after 50 years have shared such varied experiences in their own hometowns with their families, as well as the placement in the host families and the communities. In Connecticut, there was one community that refused to allow the student to come as a non-resident. There were articles in the New York Times. There was just a lot of hoopla. Yet at the same time, the American Field Service, which was a foreign exchange program, had students registered in the school. Dave Brubeck and some other interested citizens in Westport organized a fundraiser. And not only did they raise the $600 non-resident fee, they raised enough money to pay for 4 years of college for that student. And there are other situations. I talked to one student who said when he got off the bus in Princeton, New Jersey, his host family came with open arms to embrace him. And he was horrified because he had come from an all-black existence where the dividing line was very clear, opposed to an all-white existence. And on one side you had the oppressed, and the other side you had the oppressor. Here he was, an impressionable teenager, and the oppressor was coming to embrace him, and he was horrified. And it took time for him to adjust. He ended up becoming exactly part of his experience. He needed to be mentored in some subjects, and he became a mentor. His sister was in the program in upstate New York, and instead of just doing household chores, it sort of crossed the line more into servitude. And so there were a lot of different experiences. One student from Memphis, Tennessee, changed host families 4 times because he said they didn't get it. They didn't understand that he was a person and that he did not come from a rural, backwards, mythical black male situation. And so he said, finally, by the 4th family, they got it right.
Amazing.
And so there are many different stories.
Yeah.
I lucked out too,
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah.
and not that I didn't have difficulties, not that I didn't meet people who didn't understand who I was. I was a city girl from Birmingham, Alabama, and they wanted to know about picking cotton. And not only had I not picked cotton, I had never seen cotton.
Oh, you missed an experience. Oh, you missed something. Oh.
So a lot of varied experiences, and some students did leave the program after a year. One student that I contacted told me he really could not help with any reflections because his mother and father let him participate in the program at age 13. And he said, I was just too young. He said, I could not process what was going on, and so I don't have anything to offer.
Well, thank you. And Charles, what did you see? Could you share with us some of what you talked about with the, if you know the ABC program here? I didn't know, you telling me, Bonnyeclaire, that it's been going on since 1960 or 62, and it's we certainly have the ABC house here where students live together in a house. So there's a sense of not just being not that we're wolves, but not being thrown to the wolves of Westport or any affluent town. What could you talk about some of what you talked with them about?
Yeah. So we had it was really a good conversation with, and the thing that Bonnyeclaire and I tried to do was to get them to open up about their experiences. And first of all, what their interests were, you know. And so we went around the entire room. There were, 10 or so students in that room. And I was fascinated by the fact that, you know, a good number of them are really engaged in the creative process. One young man is writing. He's very interested in journalism and so forth. Another is an artist who is already spending time writing about his own art, you know. And just passing along to them and trying to encourage the idea that, first of all, you know, you have to be a real, you know, student of your craft. In other words, what you want to do in life. I recommended, for an example, to the young man that's now a young artist, to keep a sketchbook every day, to make a drawing in that book every single day. And I said, I guarantee you, by the time you put those stacks of sketchbooks under your arm, you could go to any art program in the country. Because you would have convinced them that you are engaged in thinking about, you know, make the art and the making process and so forth. And I always loved the times when I was engaged in sometimes in my own community, and people would say, oh, you're an artist. Okay, so close your eyes and think about making a design or a piece of art. That's, what? I mean, it's like,
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Right.
I mean, you make art about what you've learned and what you've lived, what you're engaged in. And I think the fascinating thing for me about the black and white photographs that you see in the exhibit of the church camp meeting in Ansonville, where my lovely wife grew up, in Ansonville, at the Cottonville church camp meetings, and then see them in the color collages and screen prints and mixed media works on the other side, is that it took me a long time. Those photographs were made in 1970, and they lay dormant in my studio I'd go back and look at them. I'd make a print every now and then when I wanted to go to the dark room. By the way, it was film, for all of you who understand what film is. But they didn't fit until I had the right patterns and colors from the Ghana experience to merge the two things together. So I'm creating my own reality, you know. So, you know, so that's what you're seeing in the work. And I always thought that, you know, if you didn't have to make a living out of your art, then you could do whatever you wanted to do, you know. But in a way, that's not true, because as a professor of design, I was actually engaged in the art making and so forth and so on a regular basis, so forth. So the students today, we're curious about our journey and what made us come from all the way from down south to Westport. They were very, very curious about that, because many of them are not that far away from their original home. Some come from New York City and so forth and so on. But we came from a pretty long ways.
Yeah, in general,
So
it's
forth.
more of an...
Yeah.
Obviously, most black people now are from living in, or a minority, you know, of all stripes, because that's ABC is very opened up, are coming from urban centers in general.
Right.
And Bonnyeclaire, you mentioned this idea of like coming home, going back to your chance of Alabama. Were you transformed? Did you fit in when you came back home? Were you changed in a way that, did you just slip right back in when you came home, or was there some reentry issue there?
That's an interesting question, because the guidance counselor at my high school in Birmingham, Parker High School, was a woman named Mabel Murphy, and she was extremely aggressive in recruiting students. Martin Luther King Jr. Contacted the Quakers in New York and asked them to help with a student in his congregation who was very promising, and under the threat of schools closing down, he didn't want her to lose momentum, and that's how the program started. After they found a family to host her, a committee said, well, let's do more of this. And Birmingham hosted more students. More students were hosted from Birmingham than any other city. And so the program was started in 1957. So by 1963, when I was recruited, the program was well known. There were other programs that had started. And then in our community, the historically black colleges had already been having summer programs and workshops, and there was always a sense within the community of uplift counseling. For example, my brother, who ended up being an aeronautical engineer, had exceeded all of the physics and math classes at our high school. So the community rallied around him to audit classes at a college in the area. And that's just been a part of the Black Southern community. So the reaction was not astounding. There was really, you're home. That was the reaction.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And how about for you, Charles? I mean, you're coming from a different place.
Well,
Obviously, I've been to Birmingham as
Yeah.
a thriving, especially, I mean, it's a great city with one of the best restaurants in the country. And, you know, it's a great place. But you're coming from a small town to, how was that?
Very different, you know, place. Smithfield, North Carolina, I think in 1963, 64, maybe there were 3,000 people in the community. Right. Rural community, agriculture is a major, you know, where most black folks worked in, you know, and my family did the same thing. So, and maybe that is the reason why our assistant principal, Mr. Wall, when he introduced the program, you know, he had only one student to step forward. You know, it just was not a community where people were ready to leave. They were not ready to venture out. And so sometimes I asked Lorenza, my wife, I said, Lorenza, would you have gone on the program? No way. But, you know, to leave home and leave a community, not really having a history. I didn't know anything about Westport.
Right.
You know, I did a little bit of research and wrote an essay paper and so forth, and did some research, but didn't have a lot of information. You know, so it was a different feelings. You know, trying to get organized to leave home at that time. Yeah.
And when you look at your career,
Yeah.
like for both of you, like the trajectory of your lives, how central do you think that these couple of years of high school away were in sort of shaping? Do you think that they had an effect on the trajectory of your life?
Well, I'm going to tell you this. When I left Westport and went to Iowa State, and all of a sudden just faced the reality of, you know, what living in the Midwest was going to be like and the racism that went on there. I think this community made it possible for me to say, hey, you got to change gears. And so after that 1 year, my brother was graduating from North Carolina A&T, and he said, why don't you come on home to Greensboro? And so that transition was made pretty easy. And I always tell alumni, people when I'm talking to alumni, I said, look, A&T really saved my life. First of all, they opened the door, took all my credits, and then they gave me this beautiful lady that's sitting over there that I've been married to for 50 plus years. And she is just incredible. So that university, you know, and an education. So.
And then you become an artist, and let's talk about becoming an artist, and this urge to leave the shores of America and go to Africa. All this.
Yeah,
Your second big traveler, I think, after Westport, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In 1995, I made that first trip to Ghana. NC State, again, we had some, it's interesting because it's always people, interesting and dynamic people who get these kinds of things started. There were 2 African-American faculty and administrators at NC State said, you know what, we need to link with universities in Ghana. We've already got links with universities in France and England and so forth and so on. And then we found out that our African-American students weren't going anywhere because the grandmama said, why y'all want to go over there? So they, you know, just another, you know, part of that community protecting, no, we're not going to let y'all go. So we established 3 linkage agreements with the major universities in Ghana. And so we're going to bring students. So we took a number of administrators and faculty to, you know, put them on the ground to look at, you know, what we could do. And 2 of us, Craig Brookins, or Kwesi Brookins, who you will see on the podcast, a professor in psychology, and I stepped out and said, you know what, we can create these study programs, you know. And from that point on, got permission from Lorenzo to go. And took my first student group in 97. And that was 2 years after planning and going back to Ghana and so forth and so on. So it was a step because let me tell you, I was a reserve officer in the United States Army, and I was a quartermaster officer. So I knew logistics like it was going out of style. So, I mean, everything for the type of bus that I was going to use to in every village or outside of that village where the students were going to live, where they were going to eat, where we're going to get water. I mean, you know, just all of those things had to come together to create, you know, really a good program.
That's amazing.
You know, one that worked, one that was successful, and so forth. And if you take a look at some of the written materials from the journals, there are a few of those on the wall in there about students and their experiences. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Bonnyeclaire, how about you? And then I'd like to open it up in the last time we have for some questions. But how do you think coming to Norwalk? If it did, how did in this work? How did it change your life?
My first thought is that I thought crossing the Mason-Dixon line was going to be some type of magical entrance into, a world of love and utopia, brotherhood, understanding, all those things. And I soon found out, number one, about the prejudices within the Euro-American community, because in Norwalk, I walked into a very diverse community. The other thing that I found out was that I had experienced overt prejudice in the South, but then I learned about the subtleties of prejudice. And it was very hurtful. It was very disappointing. And it ignited some desire in me to do something about it. I think the popular term now is activist. But back then it was maybe considered rebellion. But I grew up very fast in trying to understand the frailties of humanity. Feet of clay, not always feet of iron. And it did affect me for lifelong because it gave me a different understanding of how to approach people, how to work with people, how to live with people. And I've carried that with me. One of the ways that I carried it with me was as an undergrad, I specialized in early development. I wanted to understand, how do you grow hate? How do you develop that type of mentality? And so I wanted to study how we start out, how we're nurtured, how we advance. And so I specialized in 0 to 12 years. And that has helped me actually in so many ways in my dealings with people. I like to think so anyway. And it also made a difference in college choices. I'm a mezzo-soprano, and I was scheduled to go to Fisk because of the Jubilee Singers. And I met a woman in Wilton, Westport, was on my support committee, Betty Jones, a noted opera singer. Betty coached me informally, and I absolutely adored her. And I thought, if Sarah Lawrence produces a Betty Jones, then that's where I want to go. And of course, then I had many opportunities, and that's sort of the key to this whole experience, is that there was a broadening, there was a widening, there was a depth that I would have otherwise not experienced, and opened me up to not just a world above the Mason-Dixon line, but globally. And that was the beginning of me becoming a global citizen.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear some, if people have any questions before we wrap up. Yes, please.
It says stepping out on faith. Can we, both of you, mention or tell your faith, because it is a broad, it's strong, and, I'm here by the grace of God. Whatever you believe, it's your belief. But it's boldly stated here that I love you.
Yeah.
So, that is your podcast as well. Let's center on that for me. Send it home. Because, when we speak of Southern families or people, my parents are from the South. My father was Virginia. My father from Bluefield, West Virginia. We are embedded and grounded and surrounded by the legacy and the history of faith and how we are still here. So, can you please, individually and collectively, bring it home for us? Because you are stepping out on faith.
Well, I can tell you, my mom and dad prayed every day, and the community prayed, and their church prayed, our church prayed, that this community was going to be okay for me. I know that, and so I think from my perspective, and the reason for the title is that I had that kind of, that I was going to be taken care of, that as long as I got on my knees and prayed and they were there, so in supporting me, it was going to be okay. Yeah. One of the worst times of my life is when I had to leave Iowa State. That was really hard, and but it was my family and my family here in Westford that gave me the support, and and just to say, keep on stepping. Yeah.
From an early age, I was drawn to music, birds singing, any type of sound. And well-rooted in the church, I gravitated towards the music. And that was my strength, with the words, the lyrics, the melodies. And that's how my faith was grounded and carried me through difficult times as well as celebratory times.
Thank you. Any other questions? In the back.
Just real quickly, if we could ask you to come to one of the microphones just so that people at home could hear it, we would appreciate it.
Oh, right, I
Thank
forgot
you.
about that.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And thank you, people at home in cyberspace, for.
And feel free to queue up at one of the microphones if you have any questions. There's one on the other side as well.
Hi. I'm Lynn, and I'm Bonnyeclaire's college roommate at Sarah Lawrence College. We've been friends, very close friends, since we heard each other snore.
Okay.
I think part of what you have said about the families that you've lived with and how they helped you, what's missing in that is how you have helped us. I knew many black people, but I never had a close black friend until I roomed with Bonnyeclaire. And for the last 50-something years, she's told me how much I did not understand about the black experience and what an eye-opening and helpful love we have between each other because of that. And I'm a big believer that if everybody had to room with a Bonnyeclaire in college, there would be no more racism because she would change you quickly. But also being a kid from Connecticut and from the North, we all thought we were pretty woke, before it was a word, liberal, understanding, unprejudiced, etc. And it isn't until somebody's in your home or, on the pillow next to yours that you really, really understand somebody else's experience. And I think the great gift of this Quaker program was all the wonderful things it did for the white people, too. So I am extraordinarily grateful that you both became brave enough to risk us and stay in our lives forever. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. We talked backstage a little bit about how in our town, there's Habitat for Humanity, or these, you can, if you pay enough money, you can send your kids to build a latrine in Senegal. Yeah. And sort of visit, sort of parachute in and sort of feel like you're helping people and then write it on your resume and leave, but understanding that exchanges are much more complicated. Mm-hmm. Any other questions before we wrap it up? Please. Could you use the mic, please, just for the hybrid students? Not students. I'm a professor at Columbia. I always say students. People.
I won't embarrass Charlie because I've known Charlie since we were in high school together. We played football. I'm really curious, Charlie. What would present-day Charlie tell 16, 17, 18-year-old Charlie about how things would progress along that continuum?
That belief in yourself, a real strong, belief system. I think that comes from connection with family, with friends, with community. And in the work, I'm celebrating or paying homage to all of the villages, the craft villages, and there were 10 or so, that welcomed my students in without a blink of an eye. Put them on their looms, put them on their ceramic wheels, put them in wood carving tools, and my students went to work in those communities. I mean, just walking in and saying, this is who we are, and we'd like to spend some time with you learning from you. And it wasn't, that to me was what I was doing, and that's why in a lot of those photographs you don't see me, because I'm documenting what they're doing. And I would say, don't turn back until you're told no, because we never were. And in those communities, that's what happens. And so when you see the word village at Serigu, village at Intanso, it is what the spirit and the giving from the Ghanaian people that I'm really celebrating in that work. First week that I was in Ghana on that first trip, I saw some of the worst poverty that I've seen in my life. But people got up every day, sun up, and went to work and worked till sundown. And so what happens to you is that you are looking at it from a perspective where you're comparing it with where you came from. But then all of a sudden you move through that and you start seeing the soul, the people, the culture, and all of that other stuff. You know, it doesn't matter. The real content is within what those people are giving you, because they've been doing it so long and they want to share that creative knowledge with you. So I would say to a Charlie Joyner at 16 years old right now, push until somebody tell you no. Just keep going until you're told no.
Oh, thank you. I just want to thank you, Professor Joyner. We're pushed through your soul and seeing this really extraordinary work.
Yeah.
Bonnyeclaire sharing these experiences. And all of you for coming out tonight, and all of you on your computers or in Westport and maybe around the world. Thank you all for coming, and I just want to give a giant round of applause for these two extraordinary.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.